I'll officially welcome Jan and everyone else. Again, for anyone who's just joined us, this is our first series discussion, perspectives series, and we have Jan Sugar with Sugar Inc. with us talking about listening. So it sounds kind of contradictory to talk about listening, right?
It so is, but talking starts with listening.
Talking starts with listening, or it should.
Can I say something before
Absolutely.
you ask the question?
Please.
Just to set the stage, think about how babies learn to talk. How else could they possibly learn to talk unless they listened first? For a long time.
You're right. Years. Yeah, I love that. That's great. So we start with listening, especially now. And I would say it's not effortless, right? But it is absolutely necessary, especially now with the disruptive times that we're experiencing. So those of you who've joined us, thank you again. This should be a conversation. So please join us in the chat. Join us, come off mute, join the conversation. And I would like to welcome Jan again. So a little bit about Jan. She's a communications expert who believes that listening is a game changer, not just for the person who's being listened to, but for you as well. And Jan's business is to help people understand the user experience of themselves. I just love that. The user experience of you, right? Think about that for a little bit. She has a gift for storytelling, and she brings that to her clients to help them to bring an authentic and a relatable communication to their customers and to their people. So thank you, Jan, for joining us. In the work that you do to help leaders and organizations really understand their voice and speak in a way that they want to be heard, you have said it starts with listening. Can you say more about that? Why is listening the beginning of great communication?
Partly because it's how we learn to communicate from the beginning. So it would sort of encoded in from the beginning. So think about, sorry engineers, I'm going to make fun, because the best engineers make fun of themselves, right? So think about an engineer who wasn't listening to the non-engineers in the company and just spoke engineer. What happens in those cases? Nobody understands because it's complex stuff, and those of us who aren't engineers never learned it, and we don't know what they do. We don't know the cool stuff they do. We don't know what their work is like, what they're working on, or anything, because that particular engineer, not that it's generic in the field, but that particular engineer didn't listen. So in order to speak to his or her audience, he or she had to be listening first. So it could be said, oh, that person uses this kind of language. Maybe I should use this kind of language, and then they would understand my work. So building kind of a bridge communication. That's one example, but we only have a half hour, so I'm keeping unless you want to know more. I have an engineer story.
Sure. Tell us the engineer story. Maybe that'll help to solidify it.
So there was a company who hired me to come in and help them speak about why their roller chain, conveyor belts, bicycles, roller chain moves things. So they assigned me to an engineer and then a backup engineer. The backup engineer was also a manager, and this engineer just really knew the product well, so that I could understand why theirs was better. And he just spoke engineer to me for days and days and days. And I just had to start asking really hard-hitting questions so that he could just sort of break him of it and make me understand their roller chain. The other engineer, engineer 2, spoke to me like person to person and could explain everything in my language. It allowed me to do my job because he was listening and he understood what I would understand because he was listening. And I loved him And I was able to do my job, but not only did I love him, he'd gotten like 3 promotions in 2 years. And the other guy at the same level had not gotten a promotion in 15 years. They just kept him making that roller chain. And maybe that's what he wanted, but I wasn't the only one who appreciated this ability to listen.
And in his listening, engineer 2, was he asking questions so that he understood you and your positioning? Was that part of that listening? Because how did he know where you were coming from?
Right. Really
Right.
good question.
To be able to understand you so that he was speaking your language, so to speak.
Some of it was just that he attuned his ear to me. He didn't actually always ask questions because he was listening. He sometimes didn't
To
need.
your response.
And he was listening to my questions because I was asking him a lot because I didn't understand it. I didn't even know what roller chain was when I went in. It was a hard job describing why their roller chain was better than Brand X's roller chain. But he listened to my questions and he answered them. He listened well enough to answer what I was actually asking in my language.
Yeah. What would you say that is the competency that, like, what gets in our way of listening in a way that we're truly understanding with the person that we're talking to, that we're truly understanding how we need to be talking to them so that they'll understand, right? Like what gets in our way as the speaker?
A lot of things, more than a half hour, but.
What are the common things? I mean, you say, I think we all know that we need to listen, right? I don't think anyone would argue listening is not a good idea, right? So why are many of us kind of crummy at it? Even when we think we're good at it, we're kind of crummy at it. Why is that?
I think Di says listening is an art. It is. It's an art, but there's a little bit of science to it too. It's both, as many wonderful things are both. I think people aren't attuned to it. They just don't think, I'm going in there to learn. I'm going to listen. I'm going in there to get to know that person. I'm going to listen. They think they have to talk, and that's how to get to know people. And it is in some ways so you can get their response. So sharing back and forth, but they forget the listening half of the equation. And so I think some of it is just that we aren't trained. Like, no one says to us when you're young, you have to listen, and this is how you do it. So they don't know that they have to, and they don't know how, because there are some rules about listening. So I think that's why I think people are scared too. I think people don't know what to say back too. It's just
fear. Yeah.
There's fear.
Yeah. I speaking of never being taught how to listen. Funny story. Well, two comments on that. A good friend of mine, she carries a shell with her, like the shells that you would put to your ear, a small one that you would put to your ear and you hear the waves, because that reminds her to listen. So when she's going into important meetings, she has that physical reminder on her desk, wherever she is, to remind her to listen. I love that. I love that idea.
That's a great idea.
And the other thing, when you're saying we aren't taught necessarily the right way to listen or a great way to listen. My young daughters, 5 and 8 years old, and if I'm talking to them, I say, "Are you hearing me? Are you hearing? Yeah, Mom, I'm hearing you. Yeah, Mom, I'm hearing you. Look at me. Look at me. I don't need my eyes to hear you, Mom. Oh." But I need your eyes to know you understood, right?
That's exactly right.
And so that's one of the things, hopefully I'm teaching them, that eye contact is so important. That's one of the key pieces of listening, is that eye contact, I think. What, do you agree?
I absolutely agree. I have my oldest daughter, who's 27 now, is a good listener, but a very distracted listener. And it always made me jumpy to be talking to her, because I'd hear stuff later about what I had said, but I didn't feel listened to while we were together. And one night I talked about my old best friend from when I was 5, and I wished I could find her and see if her mother was still alive and see what she was doing in life. I hadn't seen her for years. And she put down her phone and she said, why did you like her so much? And I got to talk about my old best friend. And then she said, I'm a millennial. I can help you find her. And I said, oh, I've really, really looked. And she said, I can do it. And in 5 minutes, she found her in a Southern Illinois town.
Wow.
And I felt I'll never forget that night. It was amazing to be listened to like that. And we took action. Everything happened. I really got listened to. She knew about my best friend. She knew about her mother, and she knew, and she helped me find her.
And I bet we can, all of us on this call, think of a story or of a time when we felt truly listened to. And I would bet that it included being asked questions, being quiet, listen, to hear the answer, reflecting on our response, right? That eye contact.
I think also when you don't listen to people, I had a mother who wasn't a very good listener, so she'd say, tell me all about your vacation, and then kind of look around the room a lot, walk out a lot, walk back in, I'm listening, but it didn't feel like it. I learned not to tell her things. And if you want to teach people not to tell you things, don't listen well, because you're just training them not to confide in you, not to tell you the juicy stuff. If people don't feel listened to, they're not going to keep. And there are some skills involved. And you know that I teach this too, because there are 5 things that you can do to quickly become a better listener very, very quickly. It's not the end of the story. There are more, but it up levels you really quickly.
That makes me think of leaders who are back-to-back in meetings, who want their people, want to have that time to listen to their teammates, to their people, to their direct reports or their peers, yet they have an agenda in a 30 or a 60-minute meeting that they have to get to, right? And what reminders can we give, tips do you have to give those leaders who are, let's face it, distracted? I mean, so many of us, there are too many things in this world today, technology, our phones, right? Our computers, everything's in front of us, coming at us to distract us from true listening. And leaders are busy trying to get through their agendas and focus on their goals. And hopefully the intention is there for leaders to really want to listen. And how often do they mess that up? And, do you have some kind of tips where, easy tips, like the seashell that my friend carries around, like things to remind them to just find that time and how important it is?
Sure, I could do that. First, it's not really harder to listen than to not listen. So if you sort of adjust yourself and say, it's just that I don't think of doing things this way, but it's not actually harder. And maybe there are some things to learn. So one of the things that you could learn would be to ask a question and really listen to what got said in that question and commit to responding to it instead of the or the phone or something else. Commit to responding to it and ask. It's not all about the first question. Ask a second question based on what the response was of the first. So it's sort of like the magic of the second question is that you listened to the first. That establishes a bar that you have listened and that, this is going to be good and people will be more receptive because you've already established that bar. So that's one thing. Another thing is to remember. Remembering is a form of listening. Now I'm just going through my radical listening manifesto, but here are a few things from it. Remembering is a form of listening. So if somebody on your team says something like, my wife's actually due in a few days, you have a lot of things to remember. You don't have to remember everybody's stuff, but write it down that your employee's going to have a baby in 3 days and check back. How's it going? Did she have the baby? Are you still waiting? Or something like that. So remembering is a type of listening, and people don't really connect those things. Those are 2.
Yeah. Ask questions and remember.
ask the second question.
Ask the second question. Ask the follow-up question.
So in some kind of corporate communications courses, they give you lists. Here are the questions you should ask. And I've seen people walk around a room asking everybody the same questions because they have a list. It's a check the box kind of listening. If you hear what someone has said and use your curiosity, it's another tip. Use your curiosity. So if you think, oh, I probably shouldn't ask this, it's kind of rude and maybe I shouldn't, and start doing that with yourself, mostly it's usually okay to ask what you're really wondering about, because that's the most authentic conversation you can have if you actually ask what you want to know.
And really, you only need one question, one really good, maybe open-ended question, right? Because then you're asking the follow-ups based on that response. Right. So rather than the list of questions, maybe it's just one really good one.
Yes, absolutely.
And not just tell me about yourself, right? Do you recommend that question? Tell me about yourself.
Well, it makes people so anxious, so I don't recommend making people anxious. Yeah. It's just like the field is too big at that point. I would want to then say, if I were the person asking that question, tell me a little bit about what you might want to know. Do you want to know about my work? Do you want to know about my family? Do you want to know something more personal? And it's interesting, and I said this in the post that I think you shared. When I work with people in companies. So when I work with like an executive, invariably, especially male executives, it's happened a lot, come back and say, my marriage is better. Because I'm doing some of this stuff at home now that I've learned it. And this is just about the listening stuff. I do a lot of other things across communications, but I have so often heard my relationship with my wife is better, or my relationship with my kid is better. Really interesting.
Because of listening, because just from upping that skill set and practicing active listening and truly listening, our relationships are better, personal and professional, right? And I think there's a certain compassion that comes with listening, with truly listening, and that compassion is, comes from that real heartfelt, maybe uncomfortable communication where you're talking about things that are difficult but so needed. I mean, especially today, when we were prepping for this, we talked about the need for a willingness to sink into what might feel uncomfortable in a discussion. And when we think about, I mean, certainly with our families, but with our coworkers, to be willing to have those personal, uncomfortable conversations, share some tips on like, how do we allow ourselves to be vulnerable, to have those kinds of conversations?
Well, here's just a little answer first, and maybe it'll take us into a bigger answer.
Uh-oh. Did we lose Jan?
Looks like we lost Jan.
There, she's back. I think she's back.
I'm here.
You're here. We lost you for a second.
I didn't lose you. It's weird. Are we good?
Yeah, we're good.
Okay. So anyway, somebody on this call had a beautiful lipstick. And I said, where did you get that? And she said, my niece, and it was Mary Kay, and she sells it. So I worked with her niece yesterday and bought some lipstick. And I said, you're great. Do you want me to promote you? She's a graduate student. She's, ambitious and trying to make a go of it for herself. And she said, yes. I said, I'll promote you on Facebook. And she is a Black young woman. And I said, do you want me to say that you're a Black-owned business? And it wasn't the most comfortable thing to say, because I thought, like, what is this cool to say this? But I wanted, because many of us are wanting to use our dollars that way. And there is a, somewhat raised consciousness, and you say, well, it wasn't the most comfortable thing in the world to say, but I said it. And she said, oh yeah, and I have another business too. So could you talk about this one? And I made a Facebook post with everything I wanted to say because I was willing to ask the question that didn't feel 100% comfortable to ask. Like, ooh, do we talk about race here or not? But I thought it would, if she was it would benefit her. So it's a small answer, but how many times are we really uncomfortable when we want to ask and we don't? Okay, so that brings us into bigger conversations about race. After George Floyd was killed, I called old clients, new clients who had teams and said, are you talking to your teams about this? What white clients? And every single one said no. Why? Because they didn't know if they should and they didn't know how. Like, I don't know enough about race. I'll just sound stupid. I don't know if I should. I don't know if I'll upset people. But silence is such a poison. It's such a poison. You think of a kid getting bullied, and everybody's around and nobody's speaking up. It's poisonous to stay silent. And I said to my old clients and my new who are white, imagine what it's like with all this stirred up right now. What's going on? Open the conversation. How do I do it? They ask. By listening, telling them that you're opening the conversation to hear, so that then you could think about what your next moves were, how you wanted to handle it. But ask the uncomfortable question.
And that shows compassion. And the response shows compassion, you know, them asking it, them listening. And so your advice is just be willing to do it. Like, just do it, right? Just ask the question.
And you can say, you know,
how are you?
Yes, absolutely.
How are you?
How are you? Given what's going on in the world, how are you? And not only that, there's also COVID, and
right.
There's much racial inequity in terms of outcomes with COVID. So there's that, and there's George Floyd. It's just it's all happening at once, and it's happening anyway. It's all happening at once more publicly. And yes, how are you would be the first thing. And how should we proceed? And what's this company doing that's not making you feel how you'd like to feel? And what can we do? And I'd like to hear your story. Do you want to share it with the group, or do you want to just talk to me about it? I mean, there's so much stuff you can ask. And we can't be experts in what we're not experts in. I do a thing, I've started to do it, and I always think it's going to be annoying, but people seem not to mind. So we have this vocabulary, and we all assume that we use words the same way, but we don't. So sometimes when I'm having a conversation and I have to understand something, I think, I understand what she's saying this way, I'll go this way in my thinking. But I might not be right about what she meant. So I say, you know, when you use the word mindset, what do you exactly mean? Because I want to track you, and I don't think I'll track you unless I know what we're talking about. And people are, you're paying attention to them. They're usually happy to repeat it.
And I think I'm thinking about your manifesto, right? In our last 4 minutes. So there's a nice tangible piece that we can give to this audience, you know, to take back with them. I want to say that I believe not in the acronym order we covered most of them. Can we go through those? Okay, just as a review? Yes. And I can actually pull a screen up. I've got a visual if that's helpful. Let me do that.
It'll be helpful to them.
Helpful. I might not be able to do that. So grab your, hold on, maybe I can. Yep. Let me try this. Here we go.
It's a radical listening manifesto. And the little funny thing is it shouldn't be radical. It should be what we all do. But it's not. So I called it Grace, a radical listening manifesto.
That doesn't look right.
There was something covering it, right?
I think so. There we go.
Okay. The first one is generate. I went over it. It's ask questions that invite further conversation. and then respond with a really focused response to how they answered. And if you're not going to, because something you're really, really curious about, then say, you know what, I want to answer that, but something just came up. Can I ask you a different question and get back to that? You're just staying in connection with people. There are no hard and fast rules. The second one is remember, and that's a form, it shows people that you listened to remember, to say, I remember you were having a job interview. How did it go? Instead of waiting for them to say, hey, I had a job interview. I've talked to executives who are dating about things like this, and boy, do they get better results when they do that. The third one is alternate. The A is alternate, and that means don't be a conversation hog. That's all it means. If you see that you've been talking and talking, and say, I want to know about you, or what do you think of that, or something like that, conversation hog, and remember to ask about other people. How many of us have been in situations where we haven't been asked anything by another person, networking things where people go on and on and on trying to sell us on what they do or something like that. So alternate, don't be a conversation hog. Clarify is one of my really favorite ones, because I notice, because like what I do in life is I go around and listen to people. Like if I'm in the grocery line, I listen to how the person in front of me is talking to the cashier, because that's my fun in life. So what I notice is that people walk around and say awesome a lot. Like, whoa, awesome, dude, awesome, that's awesome. And I think it's not really a compliment. I mean, it's not negative, it's okay, it's some energy, but it's not really a specific compliment. You know, would a person who wanted to marry you rather have a Starbucks gift card or an engagement ring? I mean, be specific in your compliments. You know, I was listening to you at the meeting, and the way you explained that concept that I've never understood just totally changed everything. I will understand what you do, and it informs my work. It was great. And it doesn't have to be that long, but awesome. Let's take it out of the English language for right now and rotate it back in a few years.
More specific.
Specific. And then the last one is empathize, and that doesn't mean feel sorry for people, and it doesn't mean when you empathize and saying like, oh, that's happened to me too, you're in danger of hijacking a conversation and going back to alternate and being a conversation hog. You can say, if you see that somebody's struggling with telling you something because they look like they feel ashamed or embarrassed, you can say, you know, that's actually happened to me too, and hand it back to them. Or you can empathize by just entering their world. You know, people who are talking to others about racial unrest don't need to say to them, well, I've been discriminated against too, you know, whatever. That's not what they're talking about right then. It's to really want to see the world as another sees it. You learn a lot. This is not a drag. It's fun, it's interesting, it expands you, it makes you more interesting. Enter their world, and that's what empathizing is really about. So that's great.
That's great, and I think it's easy to remember, and it's so helpful. And what I take away from this, Jan, is the balance of it all, right? Because I would almost argue that you don't want to lean too heavy in one of these. It's got to be like this delicate dance, like you said, between don't over empathize, you're at the risk of hijacking the conversation. Making sure that you're alternating and allowing that the other person to speak and to share the story, while at the same time helping them to see that you're understanding and you're really trying to feel in their shoes for the moment, right? And of course we can't 100% feel that we're in anybody's shoes.
No, but we can get closer, and
but we can get closer.
We can get closer, and then we become closer to them. Yeah. Because communication is the tool, and what it's really about is having relationships and having different kinds of relationships. And of course we know that it's really important personally, but it's so important in the workplace too. I have a challenge for everyone, if you want a challenge, because I think we're wrapping up.
I think that's a great way to wrap. Good action point.
Okay, just in case some people want, if you can get a little bit better at these 5 things, you'll be a better listener quickly. Doesn't mean you've come to the end of your listening line, but you'll be a lot better. So if you have listened to somebody lately and appreciate them somehow, if you remember something that someone said and that's already going on in your head as you listen to this, call them up or text them or email them or however you communicate with them and to them that lets them know that you listened. If you don't have anything like that, this covers everyone here. So you're in one of these 2 boxes. The second one is to now listen, knowing these new things, or maybe there are some people on this that knew everything already. Use something new, listen today somehow, and then behave differently. Do one of these things or something that you figured out from learning these things, because there are more.
Great challenge, Jan.
And if anybody wants to connect with me on,
I think she said connect with me on LinkedIn. Jan Sugar. She's the founder of Sugar Inc. I think we lost her for a minute. That's Inc. I-N-K. You see her logo at the bottom of the screen there. And if she doesn't come back, I will thank her later. And I hope you enjoyed this 30 minutes. We're doing this for another 7 Wednesdays. So come back again, a quick 30 minutes of your day. Hopefully it's been time well spent. And thank you for joining us. Thank you again to Jan. And hopefully we see you again next week. Marie and I will be talking. I don't remember the topic for next